When I refused to take kickbacks from shady vendors, my boss fired me without blinking. He thought I'd stay quiet, just another casualty in his crooked empire. But I wasn't done yet. He took my job, my reputation, and nearly destroyed my family. So I gave him something in return, a financial investigation that would tear down everything he built. You mess with the wrong guy when you mess with someone who's got nothing left to lose. My name is Scott Mitchell, and for over a decade, I worked as the senior procurement manager for a large construction company based in Dallas, Texas. It wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, but it was stable, well-paying, and at least at first I felt like I was doing honest work. I've always believed that integrity isn't negotiable. When you're in charge of signing million-dollar contracts with suppliers, it's easy to get swept up in perks. Gifts, cash, even vacations offered under the table in exchange for favorable treatment. But I didn't play those games, not because I'm some kind of saint, but because I've seen what corruption does to good people. My father worked his whole life as a warehouse foreman, and he used to say, "Your name's the only thing that follows you forever." I took that to heart. That mindset didn't always make me popular, but I didn't care. I earned a reputation for being fair and by the book, and most people respected that. Or so I thought. Enter Russell Briggs, our company's vice president of operations. He joined about 3 years after I was promoted. On the surface, Briggs was charming, articulate, and driven. But underneath that polished exterior was a man who played by his own rules. The kind of guy who smiled while gutting your budget and asked you to lie in reports with a wink and a pat on the back. It didn't take long before I started noticing strange discrepancies in our procurement records. Vendors getting approved who had no prior relationship with us. Overpriced bids winning contracts and payment schedules that bypassed the usual oversight. At first, I assumed it was incompetence or poor internal controls. But when I started digging deeper, I realized it was something else entirely, a kickback scheme. And at the center of it was Briggs. He never came right out and said it, of course. Men like him don't operate in the open. But the day he invited me to lunch at a high-end steakhouse, I knew something was off. He leaned in after our plates were cleared, swirling his glass of wine like some Wall Street villain, and said, "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Scott. But you're leaving money on the table." I played dumb, but he didn't buy it. "I know how the game works," he continued. "You think I got this far by sticking to policy. Look, all I'm saying is, if you make life easy for the right people, they make life easy for you. You get a slice, the vendor gets a contract, everyone wins." I stared at him for a long second. Then I told him exactly what I thought. I didn't sign up to play Dirty Russell. You want someone to rubber stamp bribes, you're barking up the wrong tree. The look on his face shifted instantly. His friendly facade cracked just a bit, only for a moment. But it was enough. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Scott," he said smoothly, "you do you." I knew that wasn't the end of it. Back at home, my wife Jenna could sense something was wrong. We'd been married 12 years, and she knew when I was carrying something heavy. I didn't want to drag her into it, but I told her the basics, that something shady was going on at work, and that I wasn't willing to be part of it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Promise me you'll be careful. People like that, they don't like being told no." She was right. But at the time, I still thought the truth would protect me. That as long as I did my job honestly, things would work out. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Briggs acted like everything was normal. But then the internal audit started, focused only on my department. Minor procedural hiccups were blown out of proportion. Meetings I hadn't even attended were suddenly non-compliant. It was clear they were building a case. I kept my head down and did my work documenting everything. I didn't think they'd actually go through with it, but they did. On a Friday afternoon, I was called into HR. A woman I barely knew, some compliance officer brought in just a few months prior, read me a termination letter. It cited violation of internal procurement protocol and failure to adhere to reporting standards. No specific incident, no proof. Just vague jargon designed to justify what Briggs had already decided. I was escorted out like a criminal. No goodbye email. No exit interview. Just silence. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway for an hour before walking into the house. Jenna met me at the door, took one look at my face, and knew. I told her everything. She listened, holding our 8-year-old son in her arms, as I explained how I lost the job I spent 10 years building. And the worst part? It wasn't just about the job. It was the stain, the black mark on my name, the whispers, the suspicion. In an industry as interconnected as construction, word gets around fast. And with Briggs pulling strings behind the scenes, I found myself blacklisted without ever being formally accused of wrongdoing. Companies wouldn't return my calls. Recruiters ghosted me. Friends in the industry gave me the "I'll see what I can do" speech, then disappeared. Meanwhile, the bills kept coming. Jenna had to pick up extra hours at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Our son's private school tuition was put on hold. We talked about selling the house. I felt like I had failed them. But what Briggs didn't know, what he could never understand, was that pushing a man like me to the edge doesn't break him. It sharpens him. The days after I got fired were a blur. I went through the motions, updating my resume, applying to jobs, making calls, but none of it mattered. I was radioactive. No one wanted to touch me. Every lead fizzled out as soon as they checked in with someone from my previous employer. I could almost hear the conversation on the other end, Scott. Yeah, good worker. But apparently, there were some issues with compliance. They didn't need to say more. That kind of smear is like poison in this industry. Silent, invisible, and deadly. For the first few weeks, I was numb. I kept telling myself it would blow over, that if I just stayed patient, someone would give me a shot. But patience didn't pay the bills. The severance was thin. Unemployment barely covered groceries, and our savings were bleeding out fast. Jenna tried to stay optimistic. She reminded me that we still had our health, our family, and that something better would come along. But I could see the worry in her eyes every time she checked the mailbox or logged into our bank account. One night, after putting our son to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my old company laptop, which I'd kept out of sheer forgetfulness. It wasn't assigned to me anymore, but for some reason, my credentials still worked. I don't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe a trace of what they'd used to justify firing me. Maybe I just wanted closure. But what I found was rage. Buried in the procurement archive were scanned invoices from a supplier called Greenline Materials, one I had flagged months earlier for questionable pricing. They were still getting contracts, big ones even after I left. And the numbers didn't make sense. One delivery of concrete rebar was listed at 2 times the market rate. I kept digging. Purchase orders, billing cycles, and wire transfers all perfectly formatted, but the patterns were too clean, too consistent, almost scripted. That was when I remembered a name, Carlos Pena. He'd been in our accounting department, quiet guy, methodical, always 2 steps ahead when it came to spotting errors. We'd worked together on a few contract audits, and I knew he hated inefficiency, especially when it came to money. I found his number in an old contact list and decided to call. I didn't expect him to answer, let alone talk, but he did. "Scott," he said cautiously, "man, I heard what happened. I'm sorry." "Don't be," I replied, "but I need to ask you something. Off the record." I told him about Greenline, about the suspicious invoices, about Briggs. Carlos was silent for a moment, then said, "You didn't hear this from me. But that vendor, we flagged their payments twice. First time, the report disappeared before it reached compliance. Second time, the system logged the alert, but someone overrode it. Guess who Briggs, I said. Yeah, and you're not the only one he's buried. 2 other managers left voluntarily this year. Both tried to raise red flags about vendors. Suddenly, the picture became horrifyingly clear. Briggs had built a well-oiled machine hiding behind bureaucracy and fear. Anyone who resisted him got pushed out, discredited, or silenced, and he'd been doing this for years. I thanked Carlos and hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up reading everything I could about corporate fraud, financial reporting violations, whistleblower protections, and IRS reporting procedures. By morning, I had made a decision. If no one was going to hold Briggs accountable, I would. I started small, cataloging every vendor I remembered seeing under Briggs's tenure. I used old emails files on the laptop, public procurement logs. I looked for pricing anomalies, duplicate invoices, supplier names that showed up across multiple entities. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt. There were shell companies, vendors with vague addresses or no websites linked to P.O. boxes in Arizona and Nevada. Wire transfers routed through intermediary banks, and inflated contract values that made no economic sense. This wasn't just sloppy, it was calculated. I reached back out to Carlos and asked if he'd be willing to help me connect the dots. "I could lose my job," he said. "You might lose more than that if this keeps going," I replied, "but it's your call." After a long pause, he said, "Okay, let's do this right." We agreed on strict ground rules, encrypted communication only, no document transfers that could be traced, and never meeting in the same place twice. We weren't spies, but it sure felt like it. Then I made one more call to a private investigator named Gwen Harlow. She was ex-FBI and specialized in white-collar crime. Expensive, relentless, exactly what I needed. I scraped together what little I had left in savings and hired her on a tight retainer. I told Jenna everything that night. I expected her to panic, but she didn't. Instead, she just said it's about time someone did the right thing. I could feel something change in me that night. The shame, the helplessness, the fear. It all started to melt away, replaced by something colder, sharper, purpose. Briggs had wanted me gone because I made him uncomfortable. Now, I was going to make him terrified. In the months that followed, I lived a double life. To the outside world, I was just another unemployed, middle-aged man trying to rebuild after a career misstep. But behind closed doors, I was collecting evidence, building a case, and preparing to dismantle the corrupt empire Russell Briggs had built brick by dirty brick. Carlos and I worked in secret. He couldn't risk pulling files directly from the company servers, so instead, he pointed me to publicly available vendor databases, purchase registries, and payment timelines. He taught me how to spot patterns, how some vendors would win 2 contracts in a row with nearly identical bid amounts, or how certain approvals always came through within minutes, even on weekends. Meanwhile, Gwen, the private investigator, was doing her part. She tracked down former employees who had either quit or been quietly forced out under suspicious circumstances. Some were hesitant to talk. Others were still angry. But All of them told a similar story. Pressure to look the other way, veiled threats, strange audit outcomes, and contracts being steered toward the same handful of vendors, all tied to Briggs. One woman in particular stood out. Her name was Daphne Myers, a former compliance officer. She'd resigned 6 months before I was fired. When Gwen found her, she was working part-time for a nonprofit and caring for her elderly mother. I called her directly. "Scott Mitchell," she said, recognition in her voice. "You were one of the good ones." "That's not what Briggs would say," she chuckled bitterly. "Briggs doesn't like people he can't control." I asked her if she'd ever filed reports about the vendor inconsistencies. She went quiet for a moment. "I filed 3, she said finally. All of them disappeared from the internal record system. One of them had documented links between a supplier and Briggs's cousin. He listed it under a different name, but the address was the same. I brought it to legal. 2 days later, I got a call from HR saying my communication style was creating a hostile environment. "Did you keep anything?" She paused again. "Not on paper, but I remember everything. Every name, every transaction, every cover-up. I could draw the whole web if I had to, and so she did." Over the next 3 weeks, Daphne met with Gwen and me in the back corner of an old library outside of town. She drew diagrams, timelines, and org charts. Her memory was photographic. Combined with Carlos's data and Gwen's reports, the picture became terrifyingly complete. Briggs wasn't just pocketing kickbacks. He was orchestrating a full-scale money laundering scheme through shell vendors, many of which were tied to relatives, golf buddies, or former business partners. Funds were being funneled through offshore accounts masked as legitimate construction expenses. The company's board, either clueless or complicit. The deeper we got, the more I realized this wasn't about getting my job back. This was about stopping something rotten to the core. But we couldn't just drop this on the company's lap. Briggs controlled too much. If we weren't careful, he'd bury it like he'd buried everything else. So we aimed higher. Carlos introduced me to a retired IRS fraud investigator named Leonard Tran, someone he'd met through a forensic accounting seminar. Leonard agreed to look over our findings pro bono at first. After 1 weekend of reviewing the files, he called me personally. "You've got something real here," he said. "This isn't just internal fraud. This has the makings of federal criminal charges, tax evasion, wire fraud, conspiracy. You send this through proper whistleblower channels, and the IRS will have to investigate." He warned me, though, whistleblower protections were real, but the process was slow. If Briggs caught wind of what we were doing before the right authorities were on board, we could lose everything. So we made a plan. Gwen would deliver a secure report package, digitally, signed, time-stamped, and backed by encrypted metadata to 3 outlets simultaneously: the IRS Whistleblower Division, the SEC, since the company had private investors, and a local investigative news program with a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. But before we could hit send, something unexpected happened. Briggs reached out to me. It came as a text, short, cold, and unmistakably him. "Heard you've been busy, Scott. Let's talk. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Barnett's Cafe." I stared at the screen for a full minute. My blood ran cold. He knew how much I didn't know. But if he was reaching out directly, it meant one thing: he was scared. The next morning, I arrived at Barnett's Cafe 10 minutes early. It was a small, overpriced spot Briggs used to frequent with clients when he wanted to project class. I picked a corner table with a view of both exits. Paranoia Maybe. But after everything I'd uncovered, I wasn't taking chances. He walked in exactly at 11 Mushro, wearing a tailored navy suit, Rolex gleaming, and the same smug grin he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. "Scott," he said, sliding into the seat across from me like we were old friends catching up. I didn't respond. He glanced around, then leaned in. "You've been busy." I held his gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." His smile didn't falter. "You're not very good at playing dumb. I hear things. And lately, I've been hearing your name in places I shouldn't." I stayed silent. Briggs sipped his coffee, like this was just a casual business chat. Then he set the cup down and folded his hands. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. You're smart, driven, loyal once. But you're walking into territory that's way above your pay grade. You think you've found something, but you haven't scratched the surface. And if you keep digging, you're going to hurt a lot of people, including your family." That last part wasn't a threat. It was a promise. "You fired me for doing the right thing," I said. "I'm not scared of you anymore." "Oh, I think you are," he said, his voice like ice. "You just don't know it yet." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin envelope, sliding it across the table. I didn't touch it. "It's not a bribe," he said. "It's an opportunity. There's a firm in Houston, mid-sized private. They've got a senior procurement role open. Quiet, generous compensation, relocation bonus. You take it, move on. This all goes away. Clean slate. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to save you." I stood up, envelope untouched. "You're going down, Briggs, and I'll be there to watch it happen." He didn't flinch, just smiled. "I hope your kid likes public school." I left without another word. That night, my wife Jenna found a drone hovering near our backyard. She called out to me, panicked. By the time I got outside, it zipped away, disappearing into the trees behind our house. We reported it to local authorities, but there wasn't much they could do. No license, no way to trace it. The next morning, our mailbox was open and empty. No flyers, no bills, nothing. Just open. We started noticing cars we didn't recognize parked a little too long across the street. Someone had been digging through our trash. My son's school called to ask why a man in a suit had shown up claiming to be his uncle. That's when I knew Briggs had turned up the pressure. Gwen confirmed our house was likely being watched. "He's trying to shake you," she said. "It's psychological warfare." Jenna was shaken. She asked me, begged me, to consider backing off. "What if something happens to us?" she whispered. "What if they do something to our son?" I held her hand and made a promise I didn't know if I could keep. No one is going to hurt this family, and I won't stop until he's held accountable. I knew what I had to do. That weekend, we went on the offensive. Gwen finalized the evidence package, complete with financial trails, timelines, whistleblower testimony, and links between Briggs's shell vendors and illicit offshore accounts. Leonard, the former IRS investigator, added a professional affidavit outlining how the activity constituted multiple federal violations. At exactly 7 a.m. on Monday, we submitted the package to the IRS Whistleblower Office, the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower Capital Exposure, a respected investigative program at WZBX, the local news affiliate. Within 48 hours, WZBX called to confirm receipt and requested an anonymous interview. Gwen arranged voice masking and video obfuscation. I gave the interview under the pseudonym Tom. I tried to stop it from the inside. I said my voice warped through the software. They pushed me out. And now they'll finally face the consequences. 2 days later, the story aired during prime time. The headline, Corruption, Kickbacks, and Cover-Ups Inside the Rot of America's Construction Industry. They didn't name Briggs, not yet, but the details were unmistakable to anyone who'd ever worked with him. And the dominoes started to fall. Within a week, the IRS confirmed they had opened a preliminary investigation. The SEC followed with a formal inquiry into procurement fraud. Then came the media firestorm. Other former employees began stepping forward, emboldened by the report. Anonymous tips poured into the whistleblower hotline. One of Briggs's shell companies, Northwave Solutions, was exposed for laundering nearly $7 million through a defunct nonprofit registered to a cousin of his in Delaware. The board couldn't ignore it anymore. Briggs was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. His assets were frozen pending tax review. His company email was leaked, revealing messages pressuring managers to keep vendor relationships warm in exchange for retention bonuses. And just like that, the man who'd fired me, humiliated me, threatened my family was cornered. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt clarity. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, and it was only getting started. The real moment of karma didn't come with handcuffs. Not at first. It came with silence. Briggs vanished. One day, he was on administrative leave, and the next his office was cleared out. Name scrubbed from the company website, voicemail disconnected. No press statement, no goodbye email, just gone. But I knew better. He was running. It turns out the IRS had done more than open an investigation. They'd been watching him for months already, ever since a separate audit flagged a suspicious $400,000 consulting expense routed through a vendor in the Cayman Islands. Our whistleblower file hadn't just confirmed their suspicions, it cracked the whole thing wide open. I got the call from Leonard, the ex-IRS investigator, late one night. They're moving in. What do you mean moving in? I mean federal agents. Early morning raid, home, office, storage facility. They have a sealed indictment ready. Wire fraud, tax evasion, racketeering, you name it. I didn't sleep that night. At 6:12 a.m., it was on the news. Breaking: former executive of Green Ridge Development. Under federal investigation for procurement fraud, Briggs's mugshot was everywhere by noon. The charges were